Greetings once again from Cooperstown, New York, site of the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. It's a fall day, although it feels a little bit more like winter here in Cooperstown. We hope all of you are doing well as you join us for Virtual Voices of the Game. I'll be talking to Tyler Kepner, a New York Times national baseball writer, also an author. He's written several books, including K, A History of Baseball in 10 Pitches. Before we get to Tyler, do want to take care of some business. We want to, of course, thank the Ford Motor Company. They have been our primary sponsor throughout 2021, and it's through their generous support that we're able to offer these virtual programs free of charge. So thank you very much to the Ford Motor Company for their generous support. Tyler Kepner is a second-time guest. He's part of a rather exclusive club. We've only had a handful of guests on more than once on our show. And Tyler will be joining that club. Brian Kenny is in that club, Jason Stark as well. Today, Tyler Kepner rejoining us. He was one of the first guests we had when we started doing these programs back in the spring of 2020. Hard to believe, about a year and a half ago. Tyler has a terrific resume. As I mentioned, he has written several books, including K, A History of Baseball in 10 Pitches. He's also written about the Philadelphia Phillies, done the introduction for a book about Derek Jeter, coinciding with his Hall of Fame induction. Tyler joined the New York Times staff in 2000, served initially as a Mets beat writer, then became a Yankee beat writer. Since 2010, he has been the national baseball writer for the New York Times, a real friend to our education department as well. Tyler, thanks for being with us. How have you been?
I've been good, Bruce. You guys are certainly a good friend of mine too, so I'm happy to join up with you here. It was a fun postseason, went all over the place for the whole month, and just kind of settling back into normal life, I guess. Here in Connecticut. It's not quite as cold as it is up there, but it's very pretty this time of year in Connecticut.
I wanted to start, Tyler, by asking about this past season. For the first part of the season, well, for a lot of people, it was over half the season. There was really limited access to the clubhouse, or in some cases, no access to the clubhouse. We saw throughout the season, many teams had their broadcasters only doing the home games live in the ballpark. The road games they did either from a remote location or from a studio. How about for you? How did it start, or when did it start to become normal in terms of having some of these COVID restrictions lifted? I know it didn't happen right away. It took a while.
Yeah, it never really did happen fully. We've never gotten back in the clubhouse since the COVID outbreak began. Which has been very frustrating and disappointing because it's just harder to, form relationships with guys, and harder to do your job, harder to find people in downtime because, when they come out on the field, you can talk to them here and there in the dugout or whatever, but around the cage, but they're out there on the field to work. And usually in the clubhouse, you can find them at times when they're more casual or not really doing much. So I've missed that for sure. All my colleagues have missed that. But at least as the season went on, they allowed us to be on the field without a mask and, just sort of be more like a regular person again. But it's a real shame what the broadcasters have had to go through. I mean, not being able to go on the road is just, I think it's one of those things where it starts out as like a health and safety thing, and then then it just becomes a budgetary thing. So I don't know. I hope I really wonder how permanently, if the landscape has really changed permanently for the kinds of stories we can bring out to people and the access that we have.
Along those lines, Tyler, is there a concern on your part that this could become an excuse to keep reporters out of the clubhouse? Because we've heard that for years. Mm-hmm. Players don't really like the media being in the clubhouse before, especially after games, especially after tough losses. Could you foresee a situation where this becomes the norm and they say it's for one reason, but it's really for another?
Yeah, that's been my concern from the first day it happened, before we even knew how long it would be. In early March of 2020, I sort of thought, man, I hope this doesn't become an excuse that the players can use. And many of the players are fine with it, but I think as an organization, the players union would love to see things change. They don't like sometimes when reporters stand around, and we don't like standing around either. It's usually because we're waiting for someone to come out. So it's kind of this thing where Major League Baseball would love us to stay in because we provide free content for them. Basically, like we write about them. The more we write, the better for them. So MLB would like to keep us in there, and I think the Players Association would like things to change somewhat. And we'll see if that's something that they take up in this collective bargaining agreement. It's certainly one of the many, many topics that they'll discuss. And I guess our hope is really that just they have more important things than us, and they'll just rubber stamp that the way it used to be pre-COVID. But we'll see. I don't know. It's definitely one of the things that is said to be on the table.
Does the Baseball Writers Association have any say in this at all? Do they have any power to go to the players and say, hey, we want to get back to normal?
No, I mean, we don't have any power. It's always been when you think about it, like it's the teams have to open the doors and the players have to agree to be interviewed. So it's not like we really have any jurisdiction there. Like we do for, let's say, the postseason awards, because that's given out by the BBWA, and that's completely our show. And I've always understood that. I've always, since I started this, I started interviewing guys in the clubhouse when I was 15, 16 years old, for my own little baseball magazine, which you guys carry there at the Hall of Fame in the library. But I've always realized that that's their workspace, and you have to be very respectful of that. And let them get in, get settled, don't interrupt their conversations. It's just normal social stuff that you understand you are in their environment. And I think most writers, really, most guys who've been around, guys and girls, respect that. And it actually has worked out quite well for both sides, I think, over the years, because there's plenty of off limits places players can go if they don't want to be available. And we don't have full run of the place. We only are in there for an hour or so pre-game and then post-game. So I think it's always worked fine. But if the players can, players and the owners right now are the sort of thing where if the owners say something, the players kind of say the opposite, or they say, well, that can't be what we want because the owners want it. So if the owners want the writers and the press in the clubhouse, then maybe we should oppose that somehow, or some aspect of that. So.
Yeah, there's an interesting psychology at work there. Let's review some of the major storylines of this 2021 season, Tyler. First off, not many people have talked about it, but I think it's pretty amazing. We got through this season with very few postponed games due to COVID outbreaks, and relatively speaking, relatively few outbreaks, certainly compared to 2020. Were you surprised by that?
A little bit, yeah. We never knew exactly the vaccination numbers, but I think they were better than the country as a whole. There was still, I think in the end, there was 24 teams that had reached the 85%. So, there were still some holdouts, but by and large, I think most of the players, we didn't have any like Aaron Rodgers type situations. As we've seen in the NFL, not the kinds of outbreaks that we saw in 2020, and that's great. I mean, I think that is probably something that doesn't get talked about enough, is that MLB and the players were able to pull off a full season in the midst of all this, and with seemingly minimal interruption. Now, you'd have certain things where this guy was on the COVID IL for a little while, that guy was in the COVID IL. I remember the big game, the first game after the All-Star break, Yankee Stadium, Yankees, Red Sox, that got canceled or postponed. So there were little pockets here and there. but nothing like we saw the year before, where the Marlins and the Cardinals really had to shut things down for a week or 10 days, which was really rough.
Another interesting development mid-season, we saw the crackdown on the sticky substances being used by the pitchers. Now, I heard some reports from 2020, and maybe you can confirm this a little bit better, but with the empty ballparks in 2020, apparently the people that were at the ballpark, the players, umpires, managers, I guess a few team employees, they said that the use of the sticky substances by the pitchers was so prominent that as the pitchers were releasing the baseballs, it sometimes sounded like Velcro. I don't know how true that is. Maybe you've heard the same thing, but it obviously forced baseball into making some changes in 2021. Your thoughts on how that all came down, and do you think baseball handled it well or not well?
I think they handled it well enough. I mean, there was inevitably going to be some issues with the rollout, and I think it speaks to, again, the strange way that these sites communicate. Something will happen, and then they'll say, "Well, we were never consulted." Then the league will say, "Oh, we tried to consult," but it just goes back and forth. You would have liked, I guess, the pitchers to maybe be prepared a little more for it. The mid-season rollout was a little weird. Kind of thought they probably should have done it on opening day, so players could wean themselves off it in spring training. Instead we had this 2 months where they kind of knew it was coming, but they still sort of did it anyway, kind of like the steroid era, and you kind of knew eventually they'd probably be testing, but until they really do it, just keep using that kind of thing. And you understand, like, I'm not like a moralist, like I understand, like, competitively, if they're not going to police something, if they're not going to bother policing a problem that they know exists, and you can get a competitive advantage from it, I think any athletes or baseball players throughout history would have taken advantage. It's almost it's just how you get ahead when there's no rules. It's like, I always compare it to you driving home. You want to get home 5 minutes faster. You can go, instead of 55 miles an hour, you can go 65 or 70 or whatever, if you know that there's cops are not on the road. I mean, if you know the cops are on the road, you're going to adjust accordingly. And I think we saw that adjustment, and no one was really busted. I mean, one or two guys, I think. We saw spin rates come down. But really, Bruce, it comes down to baseball is just very, very worried about pace of game, lack of balls in play, all the strikeouts, and they wanted to enforce a rule that was already on the books rather than have to make a whole new rule and go through all that. So really, they were just enforcing some rules that I think they should have been enforcing for quite some time.
Yeah. I haven't looked closely at the numbers, Tyler, but just watching the games, following the sport, it seemed like run scoring did get a little bit better after the crackdown. That your impression as well?
Yeah, I think it did. It's interesting you mentioned that. I didn't see anywhere, and haven't asked for the sort of final numbers before and after. That was something that everyone was kind of looking at the first few weeks and months. But it did seem like it normalized to some degree. But it's still a high strikeout era for a lot of reasons beyond the sticky substances. I think that just sort of heightened it, and it was clearly against the rules. It was just a question of whether they were ever going to monitor it, and I always thought they would have, because you can see when these pitches go up, the spin rates go up. We can measure all that. They have the videos where you can see what guys are doing, all that. So like I never really thought it would get that bad, but they just sort of let it run rampant.
Some of the other storylines this year, a very positive one was in San Francisco, where to me the Giants were just flabbergasting with how good that they played, how well they played. This was a team that and I guess most other people thought would be an also-ran in a very tough division, would have no chance to compete against the Padres and the Dodgers. They end up winning 107 games during the regular season. They win the Wild. They advance to play the Dodgers, lose that series, but overall have a tremendously good season in what I think is an important market. It's a franchise with a lot of history, successful history, recent history under Bruce Bochy, now under Gabe Kapler. To me, that was one of the most positive developments that we saw, just how well the Giants played for Gabe Kapler.
Absolutely. I think if you had said that there would be a strong rival to the Dodgers, you would have thought it would be the Padres. And certainly for a while, they hung in there before it all fell apart. They've been spending a lot of money and getting superstars and everything. But it was the Giants who ended up, as you say, on top of the division and really with a team effort. I mean, the three finalists, the three leading candidates for leading vote getters for MVP are not among the Giants. It's Harper and Soto and Tatis. Actually, none from playoff teams. So the Giants really did it with a team effort. They went out and got Chris Bryant to strengthen them and add a little bit of star power. But they had power up and down the lineup. They had some pitchers who had who discovered some things and pitched found their old form. So it was really there were a lot of Gabe added a lot of coaches there, so they had a lot of development. I think a lot of making the players the best versions of themselves and getting them to buy in and stuff. So yeah, all credit. I mean, no one really saw it coming. And you're right. The point you made about San Francisco and the Giants being an important team, an important market. We remember the three championships in the 2010s and how much fun that was out there and that ballpark and that atmosphere. It's great for baseball. It's really just a terrific setting and a great rivalry. So yeah, it was nice to see the Giants back in the mix. It was definitely the biggest surprise of the season, I'd say.
How well do you know Gabe Kapler?
I got to know him a little bit when he was Phillies manager. He was very open about, letting me come by and I did a big story on him in spring training, and he made time for me in his office, and we sat and chatted for an hour or so, and kept up with him over the last couple of years. Didn't really know him beforehand. He's different. He's different than most than most managers, most other people in baseball, but he really, really cares, and he really thinks. He takes everything quite seriously, without being like a hard ass. He's very he's very good in communicating, I think, with his players and communicating his ideas. And in a town like Philadelphia, where I'm from, to be a little more new age is tough to pull off, especially when you're not winning, right? I mean, he was about a 500 team. I think it's a little easier to pull off in San Francisco, and especially when you're winning. And I think he has that sort of maybe a little more California sensibility than perhaps Philly. But I've appreciated his openness, and I've appreciated how much he actually cares about the answers that he gives and the thinking about your question and all that stuff. So it's he ain't Earl Weaver, but he's he's colorful and interesting in his own way. Put it that way.
He's been innovative, as you say, and the Giants have been innovative with an expanded coaching staff. First team to hire a female coach, Alyssa Nacken, who was on our program, I guess about a year ago, talking about the work that she does in San Francisco. So they're a franchise, very progressive, as you say, very new age, and it is certainly working. Moving on to the postseason, Tyler. Aside from the pace of play, which I think we all agree is a concern, it seemed like the number one theme was this continued escalation of bullpen usage. It's gotten to the point now, if a starter gives you 4 innings in the postseason, it's almost a headlining story. It's remarkable what has happened. I guess the question is this good or bad or indifferent for baseball?
Oh, I don't think it's good. I don't think it's good at all. I understand it, and we've seen it coming for the last several years. I mean, I remember the biggest turning point for me was Game 3 of the World Series in 2016 at Wrigley, where both Josh Tomlin and Kyle Hendricks were pitching a shutout. It's 0-0 in the fifth, and they were both gone by the end of the inning. And it would have seemed pretty crazy to remove a pitcher from a shutout ever, really, especially in the World Series. And there we were into the bullpen in the fifth inning for both teams of a 0-0 game. The Indians had a real great weapon there, and Andrew Miller, and he was in a situation where if they were going to get him up, they were going to use him. So he came. But I think that postseason in particular showed the power of having really dynamic arms in the middle and not overextending starters. I think some teams have definitely, babied the pitchers, but also just overreacted to the third time through the order thing. It's like it's an electric fence for a dog. Like you can't go through it. Like you can't, once you get to the end of that, second trip through, it's just going to be a disaster. So, stay away. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think your best pitchers are your starters who have that ability to get guys out multiple ways. But I think the biggest issue is that there's just a lot more good pitchers, and there's a lot more good arms on a staff than there were 15, 20 years ago. So they feel like with the off days built in, why leave a really great arm in the pen when you've already gotten 4 good innings or whatever from a starter? I hate it when in the postseason, when a guy, as soon as he gets in trouble at any point, second inning, whatever, it's like, well, where's the bullpen? Like he's going to wait too long with a starter. And I think a big part of it, though, is that you have most teams that are good enough to get to the World Series or get deep into the postseason have an abundance of really good relievers and guys who can just come in and blow heat and have one other off-speed pitch, and they know precisely who they match up well with in the order. This guy's stuff matches up well against those 2, 3, 4 hitters or the 5, 6, 7 hitters or whatever. And they can just play chase matchups all game. I don't think it's great for the game because I think it's better to have, I think we all default to when we first fell in love with the game. And what I did in the 80s, early mid 80s, you had these big starting pitchers, these, guys who'd been around forever. The Carlton Seaver, Nolan Ryan, and Negro and Perry and Sutton and all these guys, and it was their game. Jack Morris and Gooden, and it's not as much that way anymore. But I've written a lot about this, so I could talk about it for a long time. But just the last point I would make is that the one thing that does give me hope is that it wasn't designed this way. I mean, the Braves really wanted Charlie Morton to pitch, and he got a broken leg. And they really wanted Mike Soroka to pitch this year, and he was out all year. And the Astros really would have loved to have Verlander, but he was out all year with Tommy John. So a lot of things just didn't break right for those particular teams. And the last, in 2019, just 2 years ago, we had Cole, Verlander, Greinke, Corbin, Strasburg, Scherzer, Anibal Sanchez. We had a lot of veteran starters in that World Series. So I don't know that it's permanent, but I think it made the game a little less entertaining for a lot of people.
No, I think you're right. I think there's a theater that's there when you have the two pitchers locked up in a low-scoring duel. It's not the same when the pitchers change every inning, starting in the 4th and the 5th inning. You mentioned the Braves and Charlie Morton, and the Braves are obviously a great story. And what they did after what was really a disastrous first half of the season, that they could actually put it together, make those midseason trades, go on this postseason run. It is a phenomenal story, but to me, there's no better story than Brian Snitker, 66 years of age, lifelong career man with the Atlanta Braves, could have given up, didn't. All the writers I hear talk about him, they love him. He always makes time for them. To me, this is just a wonderful story.
Yeah, it really was. And add to that the fact that his son was an Astros coach, during that World Series, Troy. So that was nice too. But yeah, you don't get a lot of guys like that anymore. Guys who are in their mid 60s. We had two. We had two very much older managers this year in the World Series with Dusty and Snicker, and I think that's great. I think there's a real value to experience. And on the flip side, we were just talking about how great Gabe Kapler is, and he doesn't have much experience, and he's my age. He's 46. So, I think you can do it many ways. But I'm glad that there are still some guys like Snicker who show that you can be rewarded for decades of loyalty to an organization, and that you can move up the ranks, because he spent decades in the farm system, building these players up, and the Braves have a long history of really good player development, and I know that he was a part of that. So it's good to see someone like that, with his background, and it's just kind of cool to see a grandfather out there, winning the World Series. The guy, and he couldn't really believe it. He was like, to think that he and Bobby Cox are now on a par in terms of championship managers for the Atlanta Braves. He was really blown away by that.
One final point on the World Series. You did a great piece recently for the Times about World Series rings. Everybody wants them. It's the holy grail of baseball, but then nobody wears them. Mm-hmm. Talk about that.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by the World Series ring. I worked for the Phillies for a summer in '95, and a lot of people around the office were wearing their '93 NL rings, and I always thought, man, I know I want to be a sports writer. I know I want to go that path, but boy, that's the one thing. If I did stay with an organization, I might get a chance to win a World Series ring, even though I would have nothing to do with it on the field. So I've always loved those. I actually have a giveaway. The Phillies gave one away a couple years ago. The 08. It's a pretty nice giveaway, right? It was. But so I've always been fascinated by them, and I've always been interested by the fact that, maybe guys from 30, 40 years ago could wear them because they were wearable, and now they're just not wearable. And just the idea, I think in all sports, is really just to make it bigger and shinier and gaudier and more. But it's sacrifice. You sacrifice wearability. And I've been working on a book about the World Series, so I've been collecting a lot of stuff on all aspects of the World Series. So I had some fun interviews that I hadn't used yet, and didn't know if I'm going to use in the book anyway. So I'm like, yeah, this is fun. I might as well use them. And before Game 6, I was going around the field there's Rick Helling. He was on the '03 Marlins, who had the biggest ring ever. And there's Reggie Jackson. He's won, almost a dozen rings in his career. And there's this guy and that guy. So it was fun to put all that together. Yeah. And you guys have the best display. That's one of my favorite parts in Cooperstown, is go up there and see all the rings in one visual there in the World Series room or the postseason room.
It's in our Autumn Glory exhibit, third floor. We have a case that has pretty much every World Series ring ever since the practice became kind of a standard practice back in the 1930s, all the way to the current day. I hope you do a whole chapter in your book about World Series rings, because I do think it's a fascinating topic. Interesting that the rings are so big that it's just not practical to wear them. How many players told you that I just don't want to wear the ring because I'm afraid I'll lose it, or somebody will steal it, or it'll get damaged? Was that a factor at all?
You heard stories more so from previous generations about it being stolen, because they were smaller and guys would wear them, and they'd leave in the hotel room and somehow they disappear. I know Jim Palmer, one of his is gone from, it was stolen, I think. Yogi Berra, had to have one or two of his replaced. So there's, but I think from the current guys, it's basically just that it's very showy. And so, like Dusty Baker was saying, if you wear it, and people are going to notice it, they're going to talk to you about it. Maybe you don't want to have to talk about it that day, as great as it is. It is a big advertisement for what you've done. As AJ Hinch said, he said, as the kids today would say, it's like the biggest flex of all time. So to walk around, with a big World Series ring everywhere you go, it is asking for attention. And I think most players would probably just, when they're out and about, would rather just low key it. And some people like Alex Bregman said, you know what? And I think it was possible to misread this, and I hope I didn't portray it this way. It had nothing to do with the sign stealing scandal, but it's like, I don't even look at the 17 ring because I'm still playing. He's like, I'm not going to look at it. I'm not going to wear it again. As long as I'm pursuing another one. They feel like maybe it'll take away that edge. So it's better to maybe enjoy after your career's over.
Our guest is Tyler Kepner, standout baseball writer, national baseball writer for the New York Times. We're now going to shift a little bit and kind of look toward what might be happening in 2022, although a lot of this is still up in the air. We know that if there is a baseball season uninterrupted in 2022, which we all hope for, there will be some changes from what we have seen the last 2 years. First of all, the doubleheaders comprised of 2 7-inning games. That has been eliminated. Tyler, your thoughts? Good move, bad move?
Yeah, I don't know that it's officially. I mean, they've said that it's been eliminated, or Manfred, I think at the All-Star game said that he was going to, eliminate those things. Again, until it's all out there and negotiated and formal, I wouldn't put it in stone just yet. But it does seem like they don't really want to continue that, and I don't know that a whole lot of players want to either. The one thing I never really liked the runner on second base because I felt like in baseball you always need to earn your way on. You always kind of have to have every base, every 90 feet accounted for somehow. So I didn't feel like that was part of the spirit of the game. In practice, it wasn't terrible. I mean, it did speed things up and that sense of I don't say dread, but you're like, oh my gosh, we could be here for another couple hours and guys are just going to try to yank the ball out of the ballpark for 5 more innings. Like you see sometimes in those extra inning games that drag on. That wasn't as much of a possibility. But I don't like the extra inning rule to begin with. And the doubleheader thing, though, I didn't mind that. I feel like 7-inning games are legit games when it rains. So, there is a precedent for that. And it makes the doubleheader, it goes from being like, I would say like, instead of 2 steak dinners, it was, which you might love a steak dinner, but 2 of them might be too much for you. It's like a couple of sliders or something, or like a couple of 8-ounce fillets instead of like 2 T-bones, whatever. I think it was, in other words, 2 manageable portions rather than the full thing twice. And I thought I like the 7-inning doubleheaders, but I do think it's a ripoff when they do a split doubleheader. And then, a fan bought a ticket for thinking it'd be a 9-inning game, and all of a sudden it gets switched to 7. A straight doubleheader with 2 7-inning games, I think is great. But that would require straight doubleheaders, and the owners don't like those.
Yeah. Could you imagine a postseason doubleheader, 4-hour game, then a wait of about a half an hour, then another 4-hour game? That'd be a lot of fun to cover.
Well, you kind of do get them when you're watching, on TV, right? I mean, like, that's one thing that the viewers get, especially during the division series, which I think is fun. You get those couple games a day where you have 4 games a day, and you're sort of watching, maybe 4 hours and another 4 hours. It's a lot to ask, but it's pretty fun.
Tyler, what about 26-man rosters? What's your hunch? Will they stay with that or go back to 25?
I think so. I think, the union would never want to be in a position of giving up jobs. So they would certainly have every incentive to keep it. And I think from a health and safety standpoint, not COVID related, just regular health and safety, I think it makes some sense to not overextend certain guys or to have more flexibility. Then again, it feels like every relief pitcher only goes 1 inning anyway. You don't have guys going multiple innings a lot. So no, I think that's good. I would love to see, as you have there on the screen, a limit on the number of pitchers. on a roster. I wonder if that would then just promote even more position players pitching every time there's a 5 or 6 run spread late in the game. But maybe they could put in some restrictions on that too. I know they've talked about it in the past. So these are all some of the things that'll be ironed out before the next season begins. And it's going to be fascinating because there's been so much talk since the last CBA about some of these changes and about some of these ways to tweak the game that we've always known it. So I can't wait to see what the rules are going to be going forward, because there's been so much talk about it. Universal DH does seem like something that will happen. I think both sides now want it to happen, and it really was going to happen last year, but it got sort of fell through the cracks in the negotiations when they tried to tie it to expanded playoffs and all that stuff. So I'll miss something about the pitchers hitting and the strategy involved and the oddity of a pitcher having a great day at the plate. I actually love it the way it is now. With one league has one set of rules, the other league has the other. I think it adds variety. But I do understand the health the aspect. Like if your pitcher gets hurt while hitting or running the bases, that is just such a drag, and no one wants to see that. And I get that.
Yeah, the pitcher I remember, well, one of several situations was a few years back. Chin-Min Wang with the Yankees turned his ankle, I think, cutting third base or cutting one of the bases in.
I was there that day. It was in Houston. Yeah, it was in Houston when Houston was in the National League. He suffered what was called a Liz Frank injury in the bottom of his foot, and or maybe the Liz Frank's at the top of the foot. Whatever. It's a big ligament in the foot, and when it rips, you can't pitch for a long time, and it cost him that year, and really cost him, his ace status that he had attained, because he was gone in the rest of the second half of 2008, and in 2009 he came back and he wasn't the same. He was favoring the shoulder. It led to some shoulder injury issues, and he ended up being a journeyman, and really that one step changed the whole course of his career. So you never like to see that.
Let's go back to the pitcher limit for a moment. If I'm remembering correctly, before the pandemic set in, baseball was going to have a rule that would limit the number of pitchers, full-time pitchers on the roster.
Right.
I can't remember if it was 13 or 14. And then when the pandemic set in, they kind of scuttled that. It was less of a priority. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, that was the thing they were going to do, and then once the pandemic hit, they had to sort of scrap a lot of the plans they'd had before, and go by a sort of a new rule book in 2020, and then they rolled over some of those things, but not others in 2021, and I think they kind of tabled everything until this offseason and these negotiations, which have been going on, but they're still going on. They haven't finished yet. But that really scrambled all their plans.
One subject that we have to talk about, even though it's not always the most pleasant, is the labor management situation. The current collective bargaining agreement expires on December the 1st. This is a question I've been asking people, and nobody seems to have an answer. Any chance the CBA could be extended so that at the very least the winter meetings can take place starting on December the 5th?
I do think there's a chance of that, because I feel like it would be, the onus would be on the owners to lock out the players, and the owners don't have much of a problem with the current system. I think the thinking is that that the players lost the last negotiation, so they'd be the ones pushing for a big change to the status quo. So although the owners would certainly like to see some changes, because things can always be made better for you, I think by and large they're okay with the current system. So just extending it for whether it's a couple of weeks or whatnot, I could see that. I know it's a possibility, and they could always say, well, we're hopeful, we're making some progress, so we don't want to shut down the industry. I could definitely see that happening, because I don't think there's a real pressure point. I don't see. I mean, the expiration of the agreement is a pressure point, but really it's still the middle of the off season. I mean, I think the only real pressure point is spring training, unfortunately. So I think this thing could drag a long time.
What is it the players principally want that is different? What are they most unhappy about with the current CBA?
I think they believe that it encourages tanking. They don't like that there always seem to be several teams that just are not investing in players, and they're just kind of giving up full seasons at a time. I think to some extent some teams have always traded off players for prospects. That's certainly nothing new, but they don't like the extremes to which some teams have taken it, and they don't like the way the free agent market has sort of changed in recent years, to where you're not as likely to be rewarded for past performance, and simply for service time, essentially. Like, I think there's always a thought that, well, this guy's been around for several years, he's a proven innings eater, or he's a proven major leaguer, and therefore he should, he could expect to get the salaries that he was looking for. And I think owners have realized that younger players can do the job for much, much less, and that much, much less part now becomes the issue. Like, well, if you're going to phase out the older players and bring in younger players, well, the younger players, if they're the ones you really want, they should be paid more. So it's redistributing the money in a way to the younger guys. I mean, you could go out in the second year of your career and win the Triple Crown and have your contract renewed the next year for $585 or something. And that there seems to be an imbalance there for the value that you're giving a team versus what they can pay you under the current system. So I think they'd like to change a lot of things about it, really. The draft system that I guess rewards tanking, and the player compensation system as it relates to younger players.
I think the tanking issue is a legitimate complaint. It seems like there are too many teams in a given year that are putting out a roster that's not that competitive, maybe somewhere between Major League and AAA, and yet the prices, remain Major League prices. So I think that is a concern. There's been some talk about forcing teams to adopt a salary floor. Do you think that's a possibility?
I guess I would never say never, but the union has always philosophically opposed a floor because they believe that the next logical step would be a cap, a hard cap, and they have always been firm believers in letting the free market play out. And any kind of artificial limits one way or the other would undercut that philosophy of the free market being primary. You know what I mean? So I guess it could happen, but the ownership, throws that out there, and then it doesn't go anywhere. So I don't know, and it really wouldn't affect, because when they put it out there, they also reduced the levels at the top for again, not a cap, but the top luxury tax threshold would come down, and I'm pretty sure that's a non-starter for players.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the draft? We've had it for my lifetime, starting in 1965, but prior to that, there never was a draft. It was basically a massive free agent system for high school and college players to negotiate with teams. Some people think we should go back to that. What are your thoughts?
I think there are some union hardliners who are opposed to the draft, because again, that's the draft is not a free market enterprise. We all know how it works, but it has been going on for a very, very long time now. I don't ever see that going away. I think I actually like the slotting system. I think before it was a little too easy for players to manipulate where they went. And there's always some way to manipulate the draft. there's always some way to manipulate everything. I mean, they talk about service time and service time manipulation. Well, I mean, whatever system you have, unless it's like a hard, fast, the thing the owners proposed about being 29 and a half before you can be a free agent. Well, then you could, in some cases, give the team more of your years if you come in, younger, if you come up as a younger age. So there's always kind of when you open one door, another door presents itself, and that's why these things are very complicated. And that's why I don't think we're going to have any resolution really soon, because there's just a lot of thorny issues that they have to work through.
So a delay to the 2022 season would not be a surprise to you?
A delay, would it be a surprise? I shouldn't say that it would be a surprise, because I think with these sides, we've learned that that they don't accomplish things with much ease, and that they don't, in some ways, speak the same language. I guess I wouldn't be shocked if there is a delay, but it's not like a strong feeling. I can see this thing dragging into in spring training and then pushing things back a little bit, but I just think there's so much at stake. And honestly, Bruce, I don't think the system is that bad. I don't think the players can effectively make an argument, a winning argument, that they've got a raw deal right now. Maybe the certain aspects of the last CBA were not to their liking. I understand that. But I think, from an industry standpoint, there's been 15 different champions since 2001. That's more than any other sport. Baseball actually doesn't like that to be highlighted, because they feel like, still, small markets still can't compete, and they still need, more assistance, and they still need to keep salaries down. But it is a fact. And so I just don't think that things are all that bad for anybody, and certainly not bad enough to spark the kind of devastation we saw for the sport in 94, 95. Because I don't think the owners are going to be willing to blow everything up like they were back then over a salary cap, when they knew the players would never go for it. So that's a very long-winded answer for you, but if there's a delay, I don't think it would be a catastrophic thing. And because I think, even though these sides don't speak the same language, I do feel like the problems just aren't that bad to where you need to shut down the sport.
I like that answer. It's optimistic, and it feeds into my belief that hopefully people in baseball learned something from the COVID-19 season of 2020 and saw how bad it was for both sides not to have baseball, and maybe that'll be an extra incentive for them to make sure a deal is struck fairly quickly. We do have a few minutes remaining with Tyler Kepner, a friend of the education department, tremendous baseball writer for the New York Times. If you have questions, you can post them in the Zoom group chat. We do have a couple of questions already, Tyler. First off, we have one coming in from Martin Brody, one of our regular participants. Martin writes, baseball has always led other sports because of its statistical records. Do you think, though, it has hurt itself because of some of the recent rule changes that have gone into effect, the 7-inning doubleheader, and maybe some of the approaches in terms of pitch counts, the use of relief pitchers? Do you think sometimes our obsession with statistics can hurt the game?
No, I think the statistics that are so prevalent in baseball provide a real avenue for certain kinds of fans, and I think that's good. I think there's a lot of different ways to consume and enjoy baseball, and focusing on the stats is one of them, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think the biggest downside of that is maybe the way that we've seen the game changed because of it. I think in some ways the game is smarter now. Like, for the most part, you're not going to see lineups constructed, without a purpose, right? Like, oh, this is just the way we've always done it. Well, that logically, this is the way we've always done it is not, is not a logical answer. I mean, right now these teams do things with much more evidence and much more, I think, thought that goes into these decisions. But the biggest problem is that analytics tend to slow things down in baseball, whereas in football and basketball, they speed things up. And what I mean is, like, the passing game in football and the three-point shot in basketball, those tend to lead to higher scores and maybe a faster pace of action. Whereas in baseball, the stolen base and the action plays are not as valued statistically. It's more about, striking guys out and hitting home runs. The quickest way to score is hitting a home run, but that keeps balls out of play. That's not as many singles. There's not as many possibilities of action. Strikeouts are great because nothing bad can happen on a strike unless it gets past the catcher. But also nothing else happens besides the pitcher, batter, or duel. There's no ball put in play. There's no chance for all the things that can happen because of that. So analytics promotes a game where you take pitches and you try to draw walks and you try to drive the ball over the fence and the pitcher tries to strike the guy out. And that's less action, whereas the other sports, analytics seems to promote more action. And that's one of the biggest problems facing baseball right now, because I don't know how you change that. You can try all these different rules, but if it works, and it kind of does seem to work, I don't know where the incentive comes to get away from analytics.
Another question. What do you think about efforts to ban teams making the extreme fielding shifts? Currently, there is no ban on shifting. Should there be?
I kind of think there should be. I'm all right either way, but it does seem, I know that it's allowed, but it doesn't seem like it's in the spirit of the game to always have, the fielders in these weird spots. Again, it's always been allowed, but you always kind of had, except in extremely rare and unusual cases. You pretty much had the two infielders on this side and two infielders on that side. They could shift one way or the other way, but nothing so dramatic as we see all the time. It just sort of, how would I put it? It just kind of really skews what I think we all see baseball as. And it's logical, and I understand it. But I think it just takes away too many hits, especially from left-handed hitters, and it really incentivizes that hitter to just say, well, I'm just going to try to put it over the fence because that's where they can't get it. Now you can say, I'll go to left field like Tony Gwynn or whatever, but like that's not always easy. And it's not some guys' strengths, and they feel to be taking away from what they do well. So you love to see when someone bunts against a shift or someone hits a ball the other way. But we just don't see enough of it. So I don't know. I respect the idea that, well, hitters just have to adjust and you need to promote those kind of hitting adjustments, and then the shift will go away. But I just think it's so overdone. I've seen too many balls hit scorched, and they should be hit, so they're not.
Yeah. Two final questions. You made a reference earlier to something you did as a youngster when you started writing about the game as a very young boy, and then you donated, I guess, these notebooks that you put together. They're part of our collection here at the Hall of Fame. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to grow up outside Philadelphia at a time when the Phillies were great, and there were great sports writers like Jason Stark in particular, who sort of showed me the way, in the sense that, like, this is a profession that you could really enjoy. You could be around baseball all the time, and use your writing skills and stuff. So the Phillies very quickly became not so great, but I was able to see them in '83 in the World Series and really get the baseball bug then. So loving baseball and being surrounded by so many great baseball writers to read every day, I just decided I wanted to do it too, and I didn't want to wait. So when I was 13, I started making a little baseball magazine, kind of copied initially after Beckett Baseball Card Monthly, because we were baseball card collectors. And after a few sort of trial runs, I'm like, I can just write, and I can express my thoughts about baseball. And it got to be more and more of a creative outlet for me. And I realized that I had the ability to express what I was thinking about baseball in print, and I just ended up loving it. And so I wrote to sports writers and sportscasters who I admired, and they were gracious enough to help me out, write me back, and give me tips and encouragement. Jason Stark, Bob Costas, Bill Lyon from the Philadelphia Inquirer was great. Paul Hagen, just a lot of people helped me out, and especially George Vesey from the New York Times. He became later a colleague and friend. I also worked with his daughter, Laura, in Seattle. But what George did was, he wrote me back, but he also showed my magazine to his sports editor and said, "Isn't this cute? Maybe someone could do a little story on this kid in Philadelphia interviewing ball players when he's..." Actually, I hadn't interviewed people yet, but I was 14, and I did my first interview when I was 15. But anyway, so George mentioned it to his editor, and the New York Times did a story on me in November in 1989 when I was 14, and they published my address and my subscription cost. And so our subscriptions went much higher. And I also learned a lot about the media and about people, writing stories about me, TV and print and all that. And so I think it gave me an early kind of empathy or understanding of what it's like to be on the other side of an interview, and maybe how to do an interview and what works and what doesn't, and how to quote someone accurately, and just how to get the story right from the subject's perspective. And that helped me a lot in the long term. But anyway, so I knew some people at the Phillies, or my dad had grown up or had gone in the Army Reserve with Dave Montgomery. And so Dave was like a family friend, and he could sort of vouch for me. And I got field passes for my magazine, and they saw that I could kind of hold my own doing interviews. And then I was just around the vet so much that the Phillies, Larry Shank, eventually said, "Why don't we just give you a season pass, because you're here, so you're every day anyway." So I got a season pass, I guess my junior year of high school. So I was there just about every day I could get down there, junior, senior year, and then my first year at Vanderbilt also. So we did it for 7 years, and once you guys caught wind of it, you asked about it, and I was like, heck yeah, I'll give you a complimentary subscription. So when I was up there a few years ago, they dug them out for me, and I was like, wow, my stuff, it may be buried in the library. My stuff from when I was 15, 16 years old is in Cooperstown, which is still kind of wild to think about.
That's pretty rare. We have a lot of artifacts and a lot of documents, but not that many from people that young. A final question for me, Tyler. Tell us about this World Series book that you're working on. When might it come out? We know it's obviously about the Fall Classic, but is there a secondary theme to it as well?
Yeah, it's been a project I've been working on for 3 years, and we're hopefully going to have it come out next year. I have some, another chapter or so and some editing to do this off season, but it's already coming along, my off season work on it. So it's really just examining all aspects of the series. Kind of, it's not a chronology by any means. It's sort of looking at managing decisions, or how to build a World Series team, or some of the unsung heroes and their stories, or some of the moments, the stories behind the moments that so well, right? Like, instead of rehashing what was going through Kirk Gibson's mind when he hit the home run, a million times. Like I talked to Mike Davis about the walk that set the whole thing up and how unlikely that was, that Dennis Eckersley, the greatest control pitcher of his generation, would walk a batter who was hitting 199. And if he'd just gone right after him, Gibson never would have left the dugout or gotten to the plate. So, things like that, like the stories behind some of the things very well. And the 1919, everybody knows about the Black Sox, but maybe the Reds would have beaten them anyway. Like the Reds were really, really good and don't get their due. So I write about the Reds a little bit. And I have a lot of fun with some little sort of stray observations and anecdotes that I've collected over the years about like the World Series rings, or about, all kinds of fun stuff that maybe only I could think of, or not that other people can think of it, but I have a particular kind of weird baseball brain. So I'm trying just to have that brainstorm and have all that good stuff come out on the page. So yeah, it'll be fun. Anybody who loves baseball, I think will like it. But it's still it's still cooking. Still have the full manuscript to submit in a couple months.
Do you have a title for it yet?
That's one thing we're actively working on. We've had 3 years and we're still kicking around a lot of title ideas, but it'll be something about the history of the World Series, or a history of the World Series, kind of like I did a history of pitching or a history of baseball in 10 pitches. It'll be something like that, where it tries to convey that this is meant to be one guy's history of this 117-year-old event.
Very good. Looking forward to that. 2022, right?
Yep. That's the way it's looking right now.
Very good. Tyler, as always, it's been a pleasure. Lots of great insight. We love having you on. We love your friendship to the education department here at the Hall of Fame. And I'm going to make an appointment to look at some of those magazines that you donated, and because I want to get a closer look at them. But as always, we do appreciate your time. We also want to thank the Ford Motor Company for being sponsors. Our guest, Tyler Kepner, baseball writer, national baseball writer for the New York Times. Tyler, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me, Bruce. Always happy to do anything I can for you guys. It's a very special institution, and you all do a wonderful job.
We appreciate that. We thank Tyler. We thank all of our viewers and listeners. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.